I done the pasta twice just because she is a nice Angelina, the waitress at the pizzeria. Angelina, you'll be mine. Welcome to the Giulio Show. Today we got a great show. For many years, I've been wanting to understand a trust. People were always saying you need to trust. You need to trust. I'm like, that's only for rich people. I don't have anything. I don't know what a trust is and how to even go about it. Many years later, I ran into a really good friend who I trust dearly. And we were talking, and he was talking about how he uses his trust. So I started asking questions, and he referred me to a great friend of his who he trusts dearly. And I've learned to trust and get to know. And his name is Todd
Zuckerbrod.
Zuckerbrod. Zuckerbrod? Is
Yes.
that how you say it? See, I'm
Yep.
getting better with my English. If it doesn't end in a vowel, I get confused. But Todd was great because he took somebody like me who didn't know about all these um, trusts and probates and all this stuff, and I had plenty of questions, and I had to keep asking him what they mean. And he took the time to explain it to me in terms that I understand, along with stories, because I love stories that I could relate to. And I asked them to come on to the show today because a lot of people don't understand what all this means. And Todd, before I bring you on, I just want people to know who you are. You've worked in the securities industry for 35 years, correct?
Correct.
Um, you worked as a regulator with the New York State Exchange.
New York Stock Exchange.
New York, what did I say?
State Exchange.
Stock Exchange.
It may be owned by the state soon,
Yeah, right. Everything's gonna be owned
right?
by the White House pretty soon. And you were the in-house counsel with Merrill Lynch. You were their defense attorney, correct?
Correct.
Very impressive
But
because
I also did work for Merrill Lynch Trust Company and dealt with a lot of trust matters in my capacity as in-house counsel.
yeah. And you did what? Over 125 security arbitration cases?
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Through the primary regulator of the securities industry, which is known as FINRA.
You work on trusts, state matters, including estate planning, probate, trust, and estate litigation. Um, your knowledge both in the financial markets, trust, and estates gives you the unique insight to represent me and many other people.
I
Um,
also serve as a trustee for trusts in certain circumstances as
oh,
well.
you are also the trustee,
Yes.
which why is that important? You know,
Well, sometimes people don't have one that they can turn to be a trustee, and sometimes they're looking for somebody who has the knowledge and experience and can trust. So I serve in that capacity for a number of trusts.
so that they make sure that their family's getting what they're supposed to and somebody doesn't get greedy. Is that it?
That's basically it.
Yeah, a lot of people can get extremely greedy when it comes to money, right? They go from being nice to losing their minds.
Money changes people, no question about it.
And that's why we set up a trust, right? In my case, I didn't even know that I could even set up a trust because it's not like, a lot of people, a lot of friends, when you educated me, thought it was like that's just for rich people. What kind of people need a trust?
Well, you're in the state of Florida, and in Florida, the main reason to have a trust, and I'm talking about a revocable trust, one that can be revoked, is to avoid probate. Because probate is a lengthy process, it's an expensive process, it's an arduous process, and things tend to come up that complicate um, the estate. So, just to be clear, if you die owning assets, your estate gets probated, which means that the court goes through a process of distributing your assets to beneficiaries. If you have a will, it goes at the direction of the will. And if you don't have a will, it goes by a statutory hierarchy. First, it's spouse, then children, then parents, um, then siblings, and on and on.
Well,
So,
so they pretty much can do whatever they please with what you have, is what you're saying.
well, no, I mean the terms are set even if there's no will. The court is bound to divide everything amongst whichever class of descendant has the right to take. In other words, if you have no spouse, no children, no parents, and three siblings, the three siblings would share equally.
They should share equally, but in
Well,
some cases, one child may think they deserve more than others. Uh,
mhm.
so what happens then? Can they sue you? Can they? I mean, is this why we have a trust? Is this why we have a will? Or just will a will alone do? Because somebody somewhere is going to come out of the blue. You don't even
Well,
expect.
that's one of the reasons that you set up a trust to avoid somebody coming out of the woodwork. And I had a situation where a fellow died without a will, and the court received a letter from a distant relative of the decedent in Germany, who told the court that the decedent had promised a part of his estate to a disabled relative that um, was no closer than a second cousin.
Uh,
So it wasn't true, and the person didn't end up getting any money. But it just goes to show the extent to which people, will try to recover, particularly if they find that or find out there's money around.
yeah,
But
exactly. But and is that a lengthy process? Does that hold up everything? I mean, that could take a lot of time to prove.
it
Yeah.
can. It can take 12 months, 18 months, or more. If there's a dispute, these things drag on. It becomes very costly, and it's just a burden for everybody involved.
So there
So
goes your inheritance. It gets eaten up by
it can,
representation.
it
Yeah.
can, sure.
Like I
That's
had a
all.
friend who, father didn't have much money,
Mhm.
but he died and his child was pretty young. And the money went to somebody else who spent it all on him. Not on him, but on themselves rather than the child. Um, can you set up trusts where they get a certain allowance at a certain time and then they'll get the rest at a certain age? I mean, is this the way you want to protect your family? Because we don't know hopefully we'll live a fruitful, long life, but you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
So you can do any one of a number of things. If you pass away before your child hits the age of majority, the money will be held in trust for them until they hit the age of majority, which is typically 18. Um, some people would want to create a trust to hold the property even longer. Sometimes the money is distributed when you're 25, sometimes 35, sometimes 45, usually in stages. So you get a certain amount at one point, then another payment at another point. I'm not typically in favor of what I call controlling from the grave. It's a little bit unfair, I think, to have a child wait until they're 45 years old or maybe even 35 years old to receive an inheritance. Um, Most people need the money in their 20s, maybe early 30s, when they're starting out, getting married, looking to buy a house, maybe trying to start a business. By the time you're 45, you're probably going to be fairly established, and may not need it in the same way that you could have used it 20 years earlier. So I generally try to dissuade people from um, taking it out too far into the future. I think it's just put to better use if people can get it at a point in time when they need it. Now, having said that, there are some people who a parent will know just aren't capable of handling their own money. And in those circumstances, you can actually create what's called a spendthrift trust. And a spendthrift trust is, again, it's usually created upon the death of the decedent. And the trust is administered by a trustee for the benefit of another beneficiary, say a child. So, for example, I had a case where a father had 3 children, and one of them was very bright, but was just very incapable of handling money. So he set up a spendthrift trust for that person. And the terms are that it will pay out the income that it earns for the rest of your life. So the trustee is required to pay out the income that's generated from that trust. It also has another interesting feature. That trust is protected from creditors. So, yeah. So the parent in that case can give a child a spendthrift trust and know that the trust is not going to be subject to creditor claims and will have the purpose served before it's terminated.
Now, creditor claims against the deceased or the family members or anybody else. Is that who you're talking
Against the beneficiary.
about? Okay. So let's say if the beneficiary owes money to people, they can't just come after it.
That's right. They
Okay.
can go after the payments that are made, but usually that's not an issue.
So they can't wipe them out clean and throw them out on the street.
Nope.
Ah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. See, those are the things we need to understand. But I want to back up a little bit.
Sure.
Who is eligible and who should be creating a trust?
So you mentioned for the rich, and if you go back to the movies of the 30s and the 40s, you know, trusts were always associated with very rich people, with the house on the hill and all of that. Today, really, almost anybody should consider a trust in order to avoid probate.
Now,
So,
describe probate again. What's that actually mean?
so what that means is the assets that you die owning individually in your own name have to be distributed, and either by will or without a will, the process of distributing that money or property is through the probate proceeding in court. So it's not that the judge decides who gets what, it's that the process goes through the court and in an orderly way. For example, there's a personal representative in some states, they're referred to as executors, that is appointed to administer the estate. They gather the assets, they file an accounting reflecting the assets, they inform the court as to who the beneficiaries are, they make sure that the tax returns are filed, and then they petition to have the money distributed and conclude the estate.
So the
So in a
probate
nutshell,
means that it prevents other people from moving on in to avoid probate and claiming what is rightfully yours.
yes, yes.
Okay.
The challenges come when there are multiple claims on the same money. And the permutations and ways that people make claims to money is just unending.
Give me an example because I could imagine. And the money is probably, it could be very little, but they'll go very far to get it.
Oh, I've seen people go to war over tools in a tool shed.
Are you
And,
kidding?
and the truth of the matter is, money is not always the reason that people fight. it may be the playing field on which it gets played out. But a lot of times the impetus to sue a brother or sister, for example, goes back to when kids were very young, and things that happened in childhood that you would think are just insignificant, but these things fester and they lie below the surface. And when the last parent dies, they come out and it's just ugly. When people say, I want my sister or brother prosecuted, that's where I draw the line and said, look, I can't help you.
Wow.
But there are a lot of circumstances where people will say, one of the siblings, let's say, and I'll use siblings as an example because it's the usual route to which money goes. A lot of times one sibling will be close to the parent and find a way of taking money without the other siblings knowing about it. This happens all the time.
It happens while they're alive.
While they're alive. So there's a law that protects against what's called undue influence, where a child puts pressure on the parent in a way that's unlawful to give them the money. I've seen that in many circumstances.
I mean, do they wait till they get to the point of dementia, or what kind of cases have you seen where they've tricked their parents or forced their parents into doing these types of things?
Well, the answer is many. And sometimes it's not trick or force. Sometimes, sadly, a parent might know that one of the children is stealing money, but really is not in a position to do anything about it because that person is also taking care of them. And they don't have any place else to turn. So they turn a blind eye to it.
It's and like your family's human trafficking you in a sense.
Yep. Wow. So you mentioned dementia. So once a person is declared incompetent or deemed to be incompetent, they are no longer able to sign what's called testamentary documents, which will and trust. So oftentimes there's a challenge because the claim is that somebody signed documents at the time that they were incompetent. I've had both cases where people claim that someone was competent when they signed, and people claim that they were incompetent when they signed. And those are very tough cases because it's very difficult to prove whether somebody was competent or incompetent at a particular point in time. And competency can be a moving target. So in one sense, it's the ability to recognize the consequences of your action. And there are people who can have Alzheimer's or dementia, but still be competent to execute documents because they understand what they're doing. In other circumstances, they're beyond capacity, and those documents have no effect. So if you're signing a document without having capacity, those documents are of no effect. But what often happens, look, we live in a society now where people are dispersed to areas of the country or the world. When my mom grew up in the Bronx, she had all of her aunts and uncles within a block or two, all her cousins. People stayed together and they took care of each other. So, if one sister or aunt had a husband who passed away at an early age, the others would generally look to help out. It's not like that anymore. We've gone to a circumstance where, in my case, I live in Florida. I have one brother in Los Angeles and one brother in Houston, and we all grew up on Long Island in New York.
No,
The
I couldn't tell by
ties,
the accent.
the ties that bind people fray over that period of time. And you just don't see each other that often. And it's just a recipe for people being more apt to fight than feel protective and want to help out one or the other. It's extraordinarily rare that you have people who, would give up a share to help a family member out.
Isn't that
Um,
crazy? I know when my father passed away, I
mhm.
come from the old country, immigrated to here when I was young. My father passed away. I don't think he had a will or a trust or anything like that. But as a family unit, we always take care of each other. And I remember my mother sitting us down, and well, she got the money portion of it, which she had rightfully deserved,
Mhm.
right? But she took out his jewelry, and it wasn't about let's sell it. She's like, your father would want you both to have this. Now, my brother and I didn't sit there and fight. I looked at him. I said, well, you were born first. Let's go back and forth. You pick first. I'll pick second. You pick again. And we did that. And if he thinks, well, you know what? Maybe I really wanted that because that meant more to me. I was like, all right, we traded off. It wasn't, and my mother just looked at us like, wow, I expected you guys to fight over this stuff, you know, even though we were raised the way we were raised. But you're right. Today, I see people plotting, and you could probably, witness to this, plotting somebody's death because they know they have, even if it's $25,000 and they got a life insurance for 25,000, they'll do anything to plot just to get their money. Am I right? Have you seen cases like that? Or
Oh, yeah. So I remember a case where a sister started to manipulate the funds in a bank account to make it appear as if the father was taking out a certain amount of money by making deposits on two months in a year, and then showed the brother, hey, these are the 2 months, this is what dad was taking out, um, up until this point, and then a different amount up until the time he died. The problem was those deposits were not being made, and it was done as a ruse to convince the brother that there wasn't as much money as you thought might be there. And this was a circumstance where I had known the family a very long time, and the last parent died with a home that was worth over $2 million, and purportedly had $64,000 in a bank account. And that's what they were saying was there. I remember going and meeting with the trust attorney that drafted the trust, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's all they have." Um, Part of the money was going through a trust, and there was a trust attorney who was administering the trust for the trustee. And I called him up. I guess he hadn't gotten the memo, because I said the same thing to him. Look, I've known these people my whole life. They're extraordinarily wealthy. I can't believe that the father died with just 60 some $1,000. And he said, well, don't you know about the trust that has 1.4 million in it? I said, no. He said, yeah. It's a Smith Barney. The sister's father-in-law was the broker on the account, and they were looking to get my client, the brother, to sign a waiver and release, relinquishing any right to all the money, even though he wasn't even told that that was there. I'll never forget. It's the one time I think where it's the one time in my life I'll ever have a conversation where I say to somebody, "You're going to find out you've got $1.4 million more than you thought you had, and you're going to be pissed."
mm,
And we spoke for about 20 minutes, and I had to tell him that it was his sister and the father-in-law, who were basically secreting that money away and trying to get it without him knowing about it. And then at the end of the call, he said, "You're right." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm pissed."
I could imagine. I could imagine. Well, you know, a lot of people are afraid to even have a will or a trust because they're in fear for their life. And if they do it, they don't want to tell family members. And after they die, like you said, they don't even know it exists. Because I remember growing up, uh, mind your own business. Nothing is your business. Don't worry about it. But when they passed away, you had no clue what they put here, what they put there, whether it be a lot or a little. Um, what do you say to people that are afraid of that? I mean, because it's important to have a trust or a will or and so on and so forth, but they're afraid to do it because now they're afraid somebody in today's world, as you know, and it's been probably in the past too, is going to plot your quick departure.
Well, look, in order to take as a beneficiary, if there's a will, you have to be named as a beneficiary. So that's not to say that there aren't people who are, done in by very close people to them because for inheritance. I've I've seen instances where I thought that was very likely, but it's usually not done out of fear. It's sort of like the mentality of the baby boomers. I heard a statistic that 4 out of 5 children of a baby boomer do not know the parents' financial circumstances. And that's just, I think, a function of people who grew up in the Depression and kept finances very close to the vest, and they just didn't discuss those things with their kids. Um, One of the things that's changing that is as people live longer and need greater assistance, oftentimes children are coming in to provide that care. And as part of that, they need to access the parents' finances, whether it's through a power of attorney, which is a document that gives an agent the authority to access a principal or owner's bank account or other financial assets so that they can pay the bills. And we create durable powers of attorney, which are powers of attorney that remain in place even when the principal becomes incompetent. And it's done for that purpose so that you have somebody that can take charge and pay bills. You also have that with trusts. So the typical trust that we do is a revocable trust. A revocable trust is a trust that can be terminated by the person who sets it up, generally referred to as the settlor or the grantor. But for all
So
intents and
if I
purposes,
don't like you, I can terminate you.
well, you can terminate your trust.
Like trust. If you did, you know what? You pissed me off. You're out. I'm
Well,
terminating.
you
Is
can
that what
you
you're
can
saying?
you can change the beneficiaries of your trust
Okay.
without terminating it. You can amend it. That happens from time to time.
Yeah.
But uh, it's um, it's more often that people will leave somebody out in the first place. But
Yeah.
so um, anyway,
You,
the trust is a good way of making sure that the money goes to the person that you want it to go to. But in whether it's an estate or a trust, the opportunities of one of the siblings to take money. So I've come to see certain types of personalities in this arena. There's the personality that I call um, the narcissist.
yeah, we
The,
know them.
the narcissist in this context is the person that thinks they get everything and everybody else gets nothing. I've got a brother like that.
We all know
And
someone like that, right?
then there's the caregiver. The caregiver is the person that stays back or moves to take care of the parents in their waning years. Oftentimes, they think they should get. Um,
They should get some.
Oftentimes, they think they should be compensated, and one of the things they think they should get is the house because they stayed back and sacrificed their time to take care of the person. And then there are the non-committals. Those are people who are doing relatively well and they like to get the inheritance. It's not going to change their world dramatically, but they want what's coming to them. The problems arise when the person who is administering the funds, whether it be through a trust or during the life of the parent or a durable power of attorney, starts taking the money. That's very difficult to deal with, and it's very difficult to prove that it was done in a manner to deprive the parent or the other siblings of the funds. And I will tell you that the courts don't have a lot of patience for these disputes. I had a circumstance where one of the beneficiaries was looking to take all of the tangible personal property in the house. It was estimated to be worth about $250,000. And once we learned that person had contacted estate sellers, who are people who come in and buy the whole thing and give you money for it, and then they sell it. I suggested that my client come down and take as much of the property as he could and put it into a storage facility for safekeeping. And when we got to court, I advised the judge of what we had done and the value of the property. And she said, "Mr. Zuckerbrod, it's all pots and pans to me."
Yeah.
So they don't generally want to get into refereeing a dispute amongst family, but that's part of the job.
Yeah, it happens. And you know what? Well, here's the thing. We all know or should know that no matter where we are in our income, whether it be little or high, most of people my age, around 60 years old, probably own some real estate. They might own a little bit extra, which, like you said, they don't know what they own, but they should have a trust so it prevents craziness and separation of family uh, among siblings. But let's take this scenario. I got my son, and I got two sons, and one's 27, one's 30. One leases an apartment, has a job, does pretty good, doesn't have a lot saved, but has some saved, and he's spending it on his little girl. But he's not married. Then I have my other son who's engaged, but with his fiance, they bought a house, they invested money. He's got a couple companies he's starting, and he's saving some money. Which out of those two needs a trust, or do I talk to both of them, and how would I talk to them?
So they need to inherit their money from your trust.
Let's make believe I gave them nothing. I had nothing to give.
Okay.
But now they're starting their own lives. And they're in this situation. Yes, they don't have $1 million. They don't have $1 million company, but they own a house. One doesn't own a house. I mean, what's the conversation I should have with both of them, and who should?
So, it's a function of age and whether you have wealth or assets. Obviously, if you don't own anything, there's not a whole lot to pass on. And that would typically be your children passing it on to their children. But there are people that once they start accumulating some money, whether it's from a business or whatever, they should really think about setting up a trust. Now, when you set up a trust, you also set up a will. The will is called a pour over will, which means that the assets will pour over into the trust. Unfortunately, if the assets are in the name of the individual, before they can pour over into the trust, they go through probate. That's why it's very important, if you set up a trust, to put all of the assets in the name of the trust. So somebody asked me just today, do I put, the assets into the trust? And I said, not exactly. You make the asset owned by the trust. So you change the ownership. And that's what designates it as trust property.
Yeah, because
But
you educated me on that. You said after we did the trust, which I now got to go do, and you told me to hurry up and do it, is to start changing the ownership of the house, the bank accounts, whatever, to the trust name. I mean, is it still in effect before I do it, or do I have to actually change everything to make it?
well, there are two things actually that are required to establish a trust. One is the trust agreement, and one is funding. A trust doesn't exist until it's funded. And the way you fund it is to put an asset in the name of the trust. So at that point, you want to put all of the things that you own individually and change that to be owned by the trust. So you change the bank account from being in your name to being owned by the trust. You do that for a house. You do that for brokerage accounts. But there are some assets that are not subject to probate and don't necessarily need to be put into either an estate or a trust. Those are life insurance, retirement, and what's called annuities. And in those circumstances, when you set it up, you identify or designate beneficiaries. So you fill out the form indicating what percentage of the assets will go to this person or that person. And you can have contingent beneficiaries in case those individuals have passed on. And in that case, what the beneficiary does is they send a death certificate to the bank or the financial institution, and the financial institution will send them their portion of the money.
What I want
So
to do is leave them all my bills.
you
Can I
can
do
do
that? Just split them up equally, and y'all can pay it.
Actually, most of the time, the trust specifies that it will pay the bills and other costs of the person who passes away.
Hopefully, the funeral too.
Um, Actually, yes and no.
Yes, and yeah. I already got my
There's a limit that is reimbursable for a funeral. It's about $6,000.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I can't even buy a half a casket these days.
Not a good plot of land, anyway.
No, not even that. So, I really wanted to have you on because you even shared stories with me where one person started up a trust for his wife because she was younger.
Mm-hmm.
He was 90 years old, you were telling me. But little did he know, she was what, 56? Little did he know things would reverse to where he had to take care of her at 90. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, when you ask when is it time to set up a trust, I have a client who was married to a doctor in his early 50s, and they got separated. And he was living in an apartment building in Miami. Just so happened that that apartment building collapsed and killed everybody in the building. And it was also, addedly tragic because his brother, who lived in Alabama, had come to visit him and both children died the same day. So you just never know. You just never know what will happen.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, yeah, I mean, more recently, I went to see a couple. The husband was about 90 and the wife was 80. But over the course of about 6 months, she had come to have very bad Alzheimer's. It was in bad shape, memory wise.
In her 50s.
No, in her 80s.
Oh, in her
She was
80s.
10 years younger.
Okay.
But he had to take care of her. And in those circumstances, at some point, the person's going to need a memory care facility. And, it's tragic and it's very expensive, but there you go, So, yeah, there are situations where, somebody, somebody passes away. I have one that I handled recently where it's divorced couple. The husband is in his 70s. The the wife was in her 40s, and they had a child together. And after they got divorced, the ex-wife remarried. The craziest thing about it is they all live in the same house.
Okay, that's crazy.
And they seem to get along, and it works for them,
Good for them. Good for them.
But one of the major issues that come up is that because of the frayed relationships, the siblings will fight. I once heard a person who does this kind of work say when he goes out to meet people, he tells them that in 50% of the cases, your children are going to fight. He said, I lied to them. It's more like 80%, but they won't believe me if I tell them.
I mean, common sense will tell you that.
Well, sometimes it's not the children. Sometimes it's the spouses that are more problematic and cause more fighting.
There you go. You just nailed it.
I had a woman come in and she had 3 sons. And I said, I tried to anticipate what the dynamic is to try to give them ways of ensuring that people will continue to speak to each other as opposed to never speaking again. Mm-hmm. But she had 3 sons. And I said, how do they get along? And she said, they get along great. It's the spouses I'm worried about. And she was right to be worried.
Yeah. They're the ones that set the example, but yet sometimes they behave worse than children. Act better, behave better, think better, love better. Something happens when people become adults. Sometimes it's like they had brain damage along the way or something. I don't know.
Well, sometimes this stuff goes back to when you're very young. He used to poke my eyes out in pictures. She'd break my crayons. I heard one story where a little girl was 2 years old and it was her brother's 4th birthday. And she got all dressed up and she came down the stairs and everybody was paying her attention and not the boy. And that stayed with that child, that boy, for the rest of his life. Couldn't get over it. And when the ties unravel, it's probably going to be the case that they won't speak to each other, if not forever, at least for a very long time. I had a very educated woman come to me, and she had gone through the probate process just up until the last piece. And the last piece was some costume jewelry that needed to be sold. It was worth maybe $15,000. She was in Florida. Her sister was in New York. And she said, I want to hire you. I said, why? I want to make sure that I sell this jewelry and not my sister. I said, you have most of the probate completed, you know. And then I thought about it. And I said, ma'am, were you close with your sister growing up? And she said, we were like peas in a pod. I said, you know why you want to hire me? She said, why? Because once that jewelry is sold, it'll be the last time you ever speak to your sister.
Last
She
time you
started
ever
crying. She kept crying in my office for about a half an hour because that's exactly what it was. It's sad.
It's sad, you know, and I've seen families that are so united and so close, and they got along really well. But once you're right, once the death happened, the claws came out, and
Yep.
they were just ripping each other apart, never to speak to each other again. All
So
due to a fraction of, you know, whatever was left behind.
I had a situation where I went to visit a widow who was in her 20s and had married a retired firefighter who had moved from Ohio down to Florida. And they had just recently gotten married a few months before. And for whatever reason, the husband committed suicide very shortly after. The widow had been introduced to the husband by the husband's daughter. They were about the same age. They were friends.
Okay.
I went to the home, and it couldn't have been any more pleasant and amicable. 2 days later, they were at each other's throats. So, sometimes it's just lurking right under the surface.
And people sometimes don't even mean to do it on purpose because they mourn differently. You know, when a life is taken away from you, you could. It's not that you mean to be mean or mean to be nice. I mean, just people mourn differently. They might react differently. They might react out of anger and do things that they're going to regret, but they're going to do it because of the anger of the passing of whomever was in their life that they were so close to, and usually it's a parent, right? You know.
So, yeah, when the parent dies, the anger that they harbor gets increased exponentially. Sometimes the anger is with the person who passes away. I had a fella come in. He was in his 70s, probably worth about $7-8 million, and he had 3 children, all in the metropolitan area.
And I wasn't one of them. Dang it!
No.
Go ahead.
He said, "I want to give my estate to my 2 children in this area. I don't want to give anything to my other son." And I said, "Why is that?" And it went back to a fight that had been had maybe 30 years before. Yet the father was subsidizing that son's life. But something had triggered, and it was probably the other 2 siblings, that he said, well, I'm going to give it to those 2, and I'm going to leave it to them to give it to my other son. That likelihood was about as far-fetched as you could imagine.
You can see that coming a mile away.
And as it turned out, the son that was being left out had a child. And I said, sir, do you understand that you have 4 or 5 grandchildren from those 2 children, and they're going to inherit millions of dollars? And they're going to have a first cousin that when he comes to visit, he's going to see the opulence that they live in, and he's going to have nothing. He said, I hadn't thought about that. I said, I have, and I'm not preparing any trust documents for you. You can go someplace else. And he said, I understand.
Well, you did a cool thing with me, and that's a great point that you brought up, because my son, who has a child, but he's not with the mother of the child, who I put in my trust, obviously, or my will, but God forbid something should happen to him. You brought that to my attention. Something happens to him. How's this little girl going to be taken care of? Now,
So,
we don't know if the mother will, do the right thing. I mean, for now, she's a great woman. She's a great mom. We can trust that. But things happen, like you said, with, if she meets a new husband, or a new wife, I don't know. But she may meet somebody new and they might put ideas in her head, and this little girl may get nothing. You help me protect that in case I did pass, and then my son, God forbid, he should pass. His little daughter will then inherit the trust, and
well,
it'll
she'll
go.
inherit it if she's of the age of majority. The challenge is if a child passes and is married and there's a grandchild, um, who's going to control that money until the grandchild reaches the age of majority? Now, in about 50% of the cases, just an empirical observation, uh, parents do not want to leave wealth to a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law. They just don't like them. They don't
I
want
hear
to
that
leave
all
them.
the time. I hear that all the time.
But the challenge is that person is the person who's going to be the sole parent of your grandchild. And I tend to suggest to people that even though you may not like that person, it would be worse if she didn't have the money to raise the child. Because if you create a circumstance where, let's say, an uncle is overseeing the money and the spouse is left to bring up the child, you're really creating a problem because money can be used in that sense very manipulatively and it can cause a lot of damage. So my overarching suggestion is if it goes to the parent, if the person becomes a sole parent, let that person have the money because chances are they love the kid just as much as your child did, and they're going to do right by him.
Yeah. And you were pretty clear on that. I mean, you were pretty honest with me, and that's what I loved about working with you is you made things understandable. Now, I love my daughter-in-laws to be. I love the mother of my grandchild. I love a lot of people. But when you're little, you get fed all these scenarios. So you do go into paranoia mode.
Hmm.
It's not that you don't love them. You love them, but you're afraid, "Oh my god, what if they don't? What if their spouse comes in and damages their thinking, and this poor child gets kicked out in the street and they spend all the money or they get a drug addiction?" I mean, the weirdest things go through your mind because since 2020, the world's gotten even weirder and crazier, where nothing will surprise us anymore. I think we're numb to everything at this point.
Well, you mentioned drug addiction. You have to be sensitive if there's a child who's on drugs who stands to inherit a great deal of money.
Mhm.
Um, I had a
Especially
circumstance.
if they don't share. No, but go
Well,
ahead. I'm like
look, if you've got a child that has a bad drug addiction and they inherit, you know, millions of dollars, they'll be dead in 6 months.
but yeah, it'll be over.
So you have to take steps. Now, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you tie up the money, the child's going to be resentful. But on the other hand, if you let them have that much wealth, it's not a good recipe. So those are difficult decisions.
Yeah,
But
and you helped me through understanding that, even though my kids don't have an addiction, but you helped me run through so many scenarios, and you took the time to even share so many stories with me, and that's what I love. And people, that's why I want people to understand why it's important to talk to somebody like you who can give them the common sense or the right thinking. Ultimately, they're going to make their own choice, right? But
sure.
you can give them the time to think. So, as time is wearing out on us here, so let's go and say, okay, I finally got a hold of you. Now, I thought, my God, this is going to be expensive. Oh my God, this is going to wipe me out. I don't have the money to do this. How cost effective is it to have a trust to protect and to make sure your family gets what you want to
Well,
give
I
them?
typically charge $2,500 for a trust, a will, and a healthcare document that includes a do not resuscitate and a healthcare surrogate. And that's the person you designate to make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're incapacitated.
So because you spent a lot of time with me. I mean, I kept confusing the shit out of you. You had to say, okay, back up. But for $2,500, you took all that time, all that research to make sure I had the right planning. And I was just totally blown away by that, because it was like, wait a minute, you don't charge by what I have and don't have. You
Right.
have a set, give or take a few here
It
and
could
there,
change
depending
depending
on
on
what extras you
circumstances,
might have to do.
but generally
Right.
that's the yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the
I come to
baseline.
this I come to this practice in a very different way than I would say most trust and estate attorneys who do the drafting or planning. Typical trust and estate attorney will come out of law school, get a job with a trust and estate firm, hone a craft of drafting. I came to it from working on Wall Street, where every time I saw an issue with a trust, it was because something went wrong. Something broke down, something happened. And it gave me the ability in some circumstances to anticipate what problems that may be on the horizon. And I try to help people avoid those because it's really sad when the family breaks apart and people don't talk again. And it just happens all the time. So,
I mean, for that price and that peace of mind keeps peace, it keeps love, it keeps communication, it keeps everybody in check.
and people that are going through this don't necessarily recognize the points that may cause friction. So, for example, a couple came in, they had a daughter and a son. The, the daughter was established. She had a solid head on her shoulders. She was working. She was switched on. The son was very bright, but he just hadn't found himself yet. And I asked them who they would want the trustee to be. And without a hesitation, they said the daughter. I said, but let's think about that for a moment. How's your son going to feel when his sister is handling everything having to do with this money and it's out of his control? Is he going to be okay with that, or might he have an issue with it? And they said, what do you suggest? And I said, why don't you name both of them as trustees? As a practical matter, your son is going to relegate the handling of this to your daughter, by all intents and purposes. But he's going to feel like he was not left out. He's going to feel that he was a part of this. And the alternative, so
Yeah, you didn't love her more than you loved me.
this is a
You loved her
challenge.
more.
This is a huge challenge. So, I see a lot of times where the parents, let's say there are three kids and two of them are doing fine. One of them is divorced, single mother, struggling, and they buy that child a house. There are people that will go to the nth degree to make sure that things are fair. So they'll take into account the value of the house so that everything is still divided, in thirds. And they do that just because you don't want somebody to be, feel like they're left out. On the other hand, I've had situations where a child is extraordinarily wealthy, and the mother in this case came in and said, I don't want to leave anything to my son. He's very wealthy. He doesn't need it, but I want him to be the trustee of my trust. And in that circumstance, we say, not for lack of love or affection, this person is not receiving a inheritance. And they typically will know that in advance. So there are things that you can do to take the wealth into account. And it's just a matter of their personality, whether they want to equal things out or leave things in a way that will help. So I had a circumstance where there were four siblings. There was the son who had been left out of the will, who was living in the mother's home and didn't want to leave. And one child said, I don't care, let him have the house. And another one said, I do care, I don't want him to have the house. And the third one said, I'm okay if he has the house as long as he pays rent. And it was like an intervention.
Mm.
I couldn't help them. I said, guys, there's no common ground here. I can't help you. And
You
that
know,
happens
that
sometimes.
part, I mean, you all own a quarter of the house. He could have.
Well, no, in that instance, that son had been left out. So he inherited nothing.
Oh, nothing. I
Yeah.
get you. And that's crazy.
The
I mean,
rarest thing I see
what is that?
is when somebody is cut out and the siblings cut them back in because they know that what the parent had done was wrong. Um, that is as rare as it gets.
Well,
But
I was
when
just
that
gonna say
happens,
that if I had an abundance of money and I was blessed, and my mother's always the type, I got to make sure everybody gets an equal amount of money, and they save all their lives to make sure they leave us something. But if I was totally blessed and I had a sibling that wasn't as blessed, yes, I got my share, but I would take that and say, here, you know, you could use that for a better life for you and your family. But not too many people are like that, are they?
not too
They
many
want
people like
to
that.
take what the inheritance and they want yours.
In fact, I had a circumstance where there were three children, two sons and a daughter. And the father, who passed away first, left the daughter out of his will. He didn't like her husband. Well, she divorced that husband, and the mother was still alive. And the mother had come down with the daughter to see me. And I said, the right thing to do here is to have everything divided equally among the three of your children. And she said, I could only do that if I checked with the boys. And that meant she was never going to do it. And it was so sad because, the woman didn't really care as much about the money. And there was an extraordinary amount of money. I mean, it was probably in excess of $10 million.
So if somebody, the she's, I wish I could
But it
say,
was it was just the emotion of having your mother not be able to correct the wrong that the husband had done.
so if somebody does a trust and they pass away, and let's say the wife, now is in control of the trust, and the kids are on it, whatever, she has now the authority to be able to change that, or he or anybody who was left this trust, they can redo the trust. Is that what you're saying? Like for instance, let's say I've got my wife, my kids on that trust. Okay, so nobody's getting left everything, not one person in particular. But in most cases, they will say my wife gets it first or my husband, right? And then they can decide who gets it from the kids, or if we both died, this is how it's going to go. But let's say the one spouse dies, the other spouse now is in control of everything. Okay, so they can actually rewrite that trust.
That is a concern. I've seen that in a number of different varieties. But the one that comes to mind, these people were in their 50s, pretty good health, and they had kids. And the wife said, I want to ensure that the money goes to my children. And she said, I don't know if I were to pass and my husband were to remarry, how do I know that he wouldn't, give the money to the kids from the second marriage? And in that case, we created a joint trust for them, revocable trust, but specified that upon the death of the first parent, the trust becomes irrevocable, which means it cannot be changed. So there are ways of dealing with all the circumstances and things like that.
Yeah, and they would come to you because everybody's unique in their own ways and needs and wants that they would have. So we could sit here with tons of scenarios, but time is starting to run out here. But I want to really quickly just recap what are the steps and who should be getting a trust and what steps should they take, and then how could they contact you if they would like to talk to you to help them set that up.
So basically, if you're getting on in years, or if you've accumulated wealth whenever that is in your life, and you want to ensure that the right people inherit the money that you've accumulated, that's the time to do a trust. And it's done by meeting with a trust and estate attorney, hopefully one that will listen very carefully to what you want, and then craft a trust that meets your criteria. I try to do that when I sit down with people, and not only meet the criteria, but try to anticipate or see red flags or warning signs on the horizon and point things out to them that they may not have realized themselves. So my telephone number is 561-544-8144. And my email address is tzTango Zulu at tzbrokerlaw.com.
And I have to say, if you work with Todd, not only do I love his New York kind of swag, but he's got great stories, great scenarios. You were very helpful in helping this boy understand, and I call myself a boy, but this old man understand what our parents couldn't teach us, and I wish they could have many, many years ago. But you were patient. Sometimes I got you a little taking medicines probably to calm your nerves, but because I didn't understand myself, but you truly took the time. And then afterwards, you even told me about something else, which was for the house that I needed to do. So it wasn't that you were, and that was only 25 bucks, 30 bucks, whatever, right? So it wasn't like you were out to nail me to get, because people have that about lawyers, right?
Right.
They always have the senses, man, they're just going to keep digging you for money, digging. That's not your purpose. I loved working with you because your purpose was truly to help, not to bill.
I do it because I'm
Am I
interested.
getting billed for talking to you right now, by the way?
No.
No, okay, thank you.
I do it generally because I'm interested and I do like helping people. And I tell people, look, you can find somebody that will do this for a lot more money, and you can find somebody that'll do it for a lot less money. But it doesn't mean you're going to get anything better or worse. And there are a lot of times when, people come in with a leather bound trust that's 25, 30 pages or more. And I go through it, and man, there are problems with that you can't believe. So, I'm not sure that unless you get into the really, really top tier of the trust and estate sections of some firms, that you're really getting, because a lot of time this stuff gets sent down to the lowest common denominator to, do the drafting. And I've just found that, sometimes there are mistakes.
Yeah. Well, Todd, we got to wrap it up, but don't go anywhere. I want to just say goodbye to everybody, but I want you to hang out for a little bit because I need to ask
I've
you.
enjoyed this. I've enjoyed
Free,
talking.
yeah, I got a free minute with you, so I might as well ask you something. No,
Okay.
but we enjoyed having you, and we enjoy that you come from the heart, not come from the wallet. But we all have to eat too as well, so we understand that. But everyone out there, if you unsure whether you need a trust, a will, or estate planning, or whatever it is, ask.
Yeah.
Don't just think, don't just assume, call a professional. And I bet you do you charge for consultation, Todd?
No.
Okay.
You
So
know
call
why?
Todd. Free
I
consultation.
like to hear the story because I learn from listening, and I take an hour or so, and yeah, sometimes I take more,
I,
but
yeah, well, you're a New Yorker. What do
I
you want?
get something out of it too. I
Yeah.
try to help people, but I'm listening, and every circumstance is a learning exercise.
So take that time. Call Todd. I mean, look at he's not going to charge you for you to ask questions, and the only way to understand something is to ask a lot of whys or how or should I, and just see what they have to say. Maybe it's something that will benefit you and your family tremendously, and keep that unity and that love amongst everybody. So we thank you for being on today, Todd, and we thank you for tuning in and hearing this stuff, because a lot of people, some people will turn it off because they're not interested. Well, sorry for them. But the people who did will understand that there's somebody out there to guide you in the right direction.
Well, thank
Um,
you. I enjoyed the time.
yeah, and don't go anywhere. Stay right there.
Okay.
You people have a great night, and God bless. And we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.